So here's our wonderful panel this morning. We are going to be talking about long-term planning, guardianship, and educational support. And we have Bradley Newman here, Inez White in the middle, and Christine Peterson joining us. We're going to start by doing just a little introduction. So they're going to introduce themselves, and then we'll come back and we'll go down for each of the subject areas that we have, and they'll give a little overview. And then we really want to open the floor to you guys to ask questions, and we'll take it from there. So Bradley.
That on? There's supposed to be a light that turns on, Zach. It's fine?
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Brad Newman. I'm an attorney with an office in Philadelphia. It's a pleasure to be here. My practice involves estate planning. So that would be people that need help with wills and trusts and planning for after death. And as part of that estate planning, there's a specialized subset called disability planning or special needs trusts, which is the topic that I'm going to speak to you all about shortly. I want to thank you all for coming here today. The key to helping your children is advocacy. Keep on advocating. And your children will have a great outcomes.
Oh, yeah, I need to borrow that. All right, I think by now everybody knows who I am, but the reason I'm on this panel is because obviously Katie, who's here with us today, well, as I mentioned yesterday when I did my introduction, I also have a son who's 32, and Sam came before Katie and has autism. He is now technically, by all technical facts, Asperger's, and so we had been working with him for quite a while. But the reason I'm on the panel is because we realized we needed legal help. And so we went through numerous different things that we had to do for someone who has special needs, like a special needs trust. We did guardianship and then went through Social Security as well. So, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but thank you for being here.
Good morning. My name is Christine Peterson, and I am fortunate enough to be here today, first and foremost, because I am sister-in-law to Inez and proud aunt of Kate and the rest of her siblings. And I'm also a school psychologist by training. So I have spent the better part of 30 years in the field of education, working in schools as a school psychologist internationally. You might know it as an educational psychologist, or you may have never heard of the term at all. But we provide support, and my over the years, my specialty is really kind of narrowed toward developmental disabilities, kids with developmental disabilities, and autism and related disorders. So I don't personally have, I want to say, I don't have extensive personal experience supporting students with Myhre in the schools, you can imagine, because it is such a rare condition. But I'm hopefully have just some good kind of umbrella knowledge that would be helpful, hopefully, to talk about with you today. So we'll try to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So Bradley, I think we're going to start with you. And if you just want to give everybody a bit of an overview of some of the things we might want to consider when thinking about long-term planning for our families.
Okay, so clients come into my office and they want to discuss their estate planning. Typically, they want to talk about a will and how they want to distribute their property upon their death. And typically, if they have children that are minors, we set up a minors trust that would help with the support, education, and care of their minor until they turn a certain age, could be 21, 25, 30, et cetera. But an important question to ask the client when they come in is, any of their children have a disability that's going to require them to need government benefits such as SSI and Medicaid. And if that's the case, then we need to do a different type of trust, because the minor's trust isn't going to protect that child to keep their important government benefits. Because with SSI, if you have more than $2,000, you're going to get knocked off of benefits. So if you give an inheritance to your child and it's not properly tailored in the appropriate trust, they're going to lose their important government benefits. And that could be 20, 30, 50 years of benefits. So we want to make sure that we set up what it's called a third-party special needs trust. And in that trust, you give the money to the trust to supplement the needs of your child. The SSI is going to be paying for the food and housing, and the special needs trust couldn't supplement that. And it could pay for a wide variety of things, like adaptive devices, could be computers, it could be modifications to home, anything you can think of that's going to help with the person's disabilities. The trustee can pay for that. And the beauty of that is, if it's put in that proper trust, they will keep their SSI and Medicaid. So they're going to benefit from the inheritance and keep their benefits. So it is a crucial tool to have in your end-of-life planning. Now, sometimes the clients come in and they say that their disabled child came into some money from a car accident, and it was a significant amount of money, or they received an inheritance from a grandparent, but it wasn't in the proper trust, and they're going to lose their benefits. What can we do to preserve those benefits? What you can do is set up what is called a first-party special needs trust. And when first party means that's the funds of the disabled person that's used to create the trust. And again, that's going to provide the same type of protection as the third-party trust that we talked about. The only difference is that upon the death of the disabled person, the government's going to have a claim for the amount of money that they provided for benefits for the disabled person. With the third-party trust, there is no payback provision to the government. So that's the difference between those two types of trusts. And a third type of trust is called a pool trust. A pool trust is for the disabled person comes into some money, and you may think it's significant, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. And it's not enough money to protect the pay an attorney to draft this sophisticated trust. So the government allows all these small amounts of money to be put into a pool trust managed by nonprofit companies, and it gets pulled together to give the trustee of the pool trust flexibility in their investments. And the disabled person is still going to get the benefits of whatever the money that's in the trust. And then upon that person's death, the money left over in the trust goes to the other pool members. So those are the three major trusts that you want to think about in your estate planning. It would be the third-party supplemental needs trust. That's money that you were given to your child as an inheritance, or a first-party special needs trust that's your child comes into some money that's being used to put into a trust to maintain their benefits, and a pool trust, and that's for smaller amounts of money. Now, the things to think about with these trusts is you want to appoint a trustee to manage that money, and that needs to be a person who is trustworthy, capable, as an advocate and be willing to do that. Now, it depends on the amount of money. If it's a significant amount of money, millions of dollars, there's corporate trustees that would serve to do that. And you also want to think of an alternate trustee in case the trustee doesn't survive your child. And the last thing, the last tool I want you to be aware of in your tool shed to protect and preserve the benefits of your child is called an ABLE account. So I mentioned before, SSI, there's a $2,000 limit on the amount of money the person can have in order to receive benefits. About 15 years ago, the Obama administration and Congress at the time felt that the $2,000 was very unfair to disabled persons. So they came up with a law that allowed each state to establish what is called the ABLE program, and that's Achieving a Better Life Experience. And most states have these ABLE savings programs, which provides people with disabilities the opportunity for a greater control of their finances and to plan a more secure future. So $18,000 can be deposited into this ABLE account each year. So that means they can keep their $2,000 and this additional $18,000. So now they have $20,000 that they can invest as they see fit, or the person who is managing that person's finances sees fit. So it could be mutual funds, it could be interest-bearing savings account. There's about 7 investment options in Pennsylvania. And it grows tax-free. And it's a good way to allow the disabled person to have more independence and control of their life. As I said, there's an $18,000 limit each year. But if the disabled person is working and that, it could be part-time work, they could be $10,000 a year. They can put an additional, their wages into that account on top of the $18,000. So they put in another $10,000 and they'll have $28,000, and it can grow and grow. And so this legislation was critical because now you've increased their ability to have money under their control more than $2,000. And the ABLE account, you have to have a disability of onset before your 26th birthday. And you can use withdrawals from these accounts for many things that the disabled person needs. It could be education, housing, transportation, preventive and wellness plans, financial management, etc. So they're the tools that I want you to think about when you're doing your estate planning. In your will, you can establish this trust. And upon your death, the inheritance pours into the trust. The trustee then manages the money for the sole benefit of the disabled person.
Thank you, Bradley, for that overview. And I guess this is a nice segue now into Inez to chat about not necessarily the financial side, but the overall guardianship and the process that you went through with your family.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for speaking about the special trust. Just so you know, if you need any information about someone who's actually gone through the special trust process, we started it in South Carolina, actually, and then we moved to South Dakota, and we took our special needs trust with us and went to see a lawyer in South Dakota and redid it in South Dakota, just to make sure that we had all of the more up-to-date laws potentially for the state of South Dakota as well.
Yeah, so each state has full faith and credit to other states' laws. So if it was validly done in your state and you move to another state, it's still valid. Also because special needs trusts are federally regulated. But it's always a good idea to meet with an attorney to see if there are specific state laws that require some additional language in the trust. And the trust itself allows the trustee to amend the trust.
So Sam and Katie both have a special needs trust. So I'll talk a little bit about guardianship, but I want to preface this by saying not everyone has a guardianship for their child. We nearly didn't have one. So this is my experience, but there are other ways. If your child is independent enough to make their own decisions, I mean, Katie obviously has her mind of her own, and so does her brother. So we went through the process with them. But all I'm saying is this is what we did, but there are other ways to do it as well. So this is our experience. Being that came from the military side, we didn't even know Social Security we didn't even think about it. Nobody even brought it up that we should have applied for it when she was younger or when he was younger. And then all of a sudden we thought, well, wait a minute, what happens when Sam turns 18? And this was like 6 months before he turned 18. And someone said, and I think we actually spoke to a lawyer, they're like, well, you could do guardianship. And we're like, what? And they're like, well, and maybe you might want to do it before he turns 18. So because we were military, we went back to South Dakota because legally that was our home state. And it was a lot easier because we had, it's a small town and it was a lot less expensive. So he walked us through the entire process and we went to a court. We went to court and we took Sam with us because he's verbal, he's high functioning autistic. And in front of a judge, he actually asked Sam if he was okay us taking guardianship. And yeah, sure. He's like, sure. So we are his legal guardians. And then when we realized this might be a good idea for Katie, we started that process a whole lot earlier. Again, we went back to South Dakota and went before a judge. She went with us and she said yes. It's important to know that at any point, if Katie and Sam decide they no longer want us to be their guardians, that she can do that if she wanted to. We could go back to court and then revoke our guardianship if that's strictly what she wanted to do. The great thing about the guardianship, though, is we have full access to everything for Katie. Like, I don't have to ask permission. We go to appointments and 99% of the time, she doesn't really care. She just says, okay, we'll go. But every time I go to a medical appointment or new doctors, they always say, oh, because obviously she's 26. Yes, and access to records as well, banking information. So, and then the other thing that sometimes scares me to death is, you know how you get flyers in the mail to sign up for credit cards or people asking for money, those kinds of things. Even if she signed up for it as guardians, if we are made aware of it, we can go back and say, nope, she was not legally allowed to do that. You cannot loan her $10,000 and go out the door and have her buy a car. So those kinds of things are important to us. But again, like I said, it's not the way everyone does it. It's the way we did it. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Can I add one thing? So I don't know how things were in South Dakota in the court process, but the judges in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties, it's not a scary process. They're really receptive and understanding of the needs of people who need guardianship protection. So don't let that process intimidate you.
I also highly encourage you, if you don't have a will, to please get a will. I had a will very, very young because the military always makes sure that people, obviously, who are in the military get a will. And I'm not saying go run out the door, go get a will. But even our daughter, who's in her 30s, she's 34, she thought she didn't need a will. She's like, well, Mom, I don't own anything. I'm like, yeah, but you have 4 children, so and you have insurance. You have life insurance. So yes, you do need a will. So now she has a will. So I think it's very important that I say that because it's important. And also the Social Security process, start as early as possible. My son has Medicare. Katie has Medicaid. And I was just talking to Margot's mom. The first thing the lady told us in South Carolina when we first applied for Social Security is they're going to deny you. They're going to deny you the first time. It's just the way the process is. Go back. With Sam, we went back and it took a little while, but and he's physically great. Katie got denied. And we took it all the way to a judge. And within less than 5 minutes, he's like, I don't understand why you're here. We had to get a lawyer, a special lawyer who deals with Social Security, and she didn't charge us at all. She charged us after we got judgment on the case, but that was a specialty. So please do that. That's another choice.
Yeah, that's good advice. Again, it goes to, Inez being a strong advocate because they are going to deny the SSI a lot, hoping that you just give up, but you just can't give up.
We're going to switch gears slightly, but then we're going to come back to all of this because we're going to open it up. I'm sure you guys have got lots of questions already, and that's what this session is designed for. But Christine, you might remember, for those of you who were at our virtual conference last year, Christine did a really spectacular presentation on educational partnerships and how you can build those bridges with your schools. And she also has a poster in the poster hall. So if you haven't had the chance to speak to her about it yet, we've then put her in front of you to give a slight overview on some of the work she's doing, because it was a very popular talk and we had lots of questions. So you want to give us a bit of an overview on your poster and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. So I'm going to be brief because I feel like people have questions. Oh, is that better? Sorry. Thank you. So I'm trying to make this as internationally applicable as possible. I know that particularly some of the legal pieces are specific to the United States. And that's true educationally as well when we talk about things like individual education plans and IEP processes and things. But there are some universal kind of principles that I think apply. If you have a child in school, some of these things should apply. So I was trying to think about how do you boil it down, because there's so much. I mean, you guys did a brilliant job. It's the same thing. There's so much to know and think about. But if I had to kind of give you three just even springboard things to think about, number one would be to cultivate a school team. If you live in the United States and you may be at a school where you just hit the lottery and the team comes to you, and it's there, you legally should have an IEP team if your child is receiving special education services. Sometimes that process is there waiting for you and you just plug seamlessly into it. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. There may be the structure of the team, but you may feel that you're not getting your needs met. I hear that a lot, that yes, we have an IEP, but I don't know that much about it and I don't feel like I have a big say in it. So my first thought for you is cultivate that team. Starting with your educators, your general education teacher, your special education teacher, and saying, I want to meet with the providers that deal with my child, special providers as well, and really start to cultivate. My recommendation is always to go in with the idea that we are shared allies. I want the best for my child. You want the best for your student, who is the same person, my child, your student. And so let's be allies in doing just that. Second thing is to be specific and establish shared expectations. So some of that may happen through the IEP process. Again, I'm using a little bit more of a US specific term, but if you're in another country and you have a specialized plan of any sort, in the United States, there's a legal process that is, and part of that is to establish what are our learning goals for this year. We want our child to have the benchmarks of first grade, second grade, third grade, and so on. But how are we going to customize that based on their needs? And so you want to be sure to establish shared goals, yes, for your child's learning, but importantly also for things like communication. Expressing your desires, and you may have to learn what those are. You may not go in right away knowing, but once you get a sense of what you feel your needs are to better understand and have a clear picture of your child's sort of school day and their experience, you'll get a sense of how often you want to communicate. Express that, communicate that, and get those shared expectations calibrated. Because I think that's sometimes where tension comes. You're wanting to meet a lot and they're thinking we'll meet twice a year. And if you're not communicating and actually, there may even be some negotiation. I can't meet with you every 4 days because I have 30 other students that I also have to support, but we could meet monthly or we could meet quarterly or whatever that may be. And so just keep at it. And then that is my last recommendation is keep at it. Keep communicating until you feel like your needs are getting met. And, again, the sort of push-pull, you want to go in open and feeling like an ally. At the same time, you may have to say, I'm sorry, I know you may be frustrated, but I'm not feeling like what I'm getting. I'm not feeling like I'm getting what I need. So I need this. And as I mentioned at our last meeting, I'd really love the PT and the OT and the speech person to be here at least once a quarter so that we could meet on those IEP goals, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say cultivate your team, calibrate expectations, and keep going until you feel like you have your needs met.
Thank you. Right, let's open the floor. We can start with any of these topics or something else. So, okay, over here. Actually, Michaela's up with you. She's got a mic in her hand.
Down. Anyway, thank you so much for these really, really helpful talks. I have sorry, Margot. I have a really basic question, which is I have an 8-year-old with Myhre and an 8-year-old without Myhre. What's like an ideal timeline to start thinking about anything beyond, like my husband and I have a will, but we haven't really done anything else? That's my first question. If I can ask a second, how much is state dependent? So I'm thinking in my own case, my parents live out of state. I live in a different state. Do I need to speak to 2 different lawyers in each state? Like, how does that work exactly? I'm right here. Thank you.
You need to start thinking about it now because you and your husband, although your kids are young, you could have a common disaster. You could get into an accident and both of you pass. So you need to think of it now. And like I said, I don't know what your will states, but you want the money to go to them and at the same time protect their benefits. As for your parent living out of state, you don't need to consult with an attorney from their state with your estate planning. But you need to tell your parents that if you have set up special needs trusts for your children and they want to leave an inheritance to them, they need to leave it to that trust that you set up. Now, also, if they may set up their own separate special needs trust, and that would be dependent on their state. But these special needs trusts are based on Social Security regulations, so most of these states are very similar in how they review these trusts. So long-winded answer, talk to your attorney in your state And then your parents, if they want to set up a separate special needs trust, they can. And they should talk to an attorney in their state. And maybe the two attorneys can coordinate things.
If there's anyone in the audience who has someone in the military that's in their family as well, one thing I want to add is when I retired, I paid a small, it's like $7 a month. So that when, not if, not if, when I pass, my retirement pay, a portion of my retirement pay will go straight into that special needs trust for Katie. A lot of military people don't even know that that exists, and it's very cheap. It's only $7. But that's how also our special needs trust. So if you know someone who's in the military, it has to be done as they retire. So if you're already retired, you can't do it, but you can do it as you retire.
Yeah, that just leads me to another idea. So not only do you need to do a will, sometimes you have beneficiary designations on some of your brokerage accounts and your investments. You want to make sure that language goes to the special needs trust and not directly to the disabled child. And as for, like I said, I think you should start the planning to think of the special needs trust now, even if they're 8 years old. As for a guardianship, that's too soon to think about because she's the natural guardian of her kids, but at 18, legally, they become a majority. So maybe at 17 and a half, you start thinking about going for a guardianship.
And I guess, Cal, do you want to go over to Cal? Keep your hand up, Cal. Michaela's coming. And for Bradley, just for people from overseas, different international areas, is it just best for them to start engaging, looking at what's available in their country, and then start engaging with a specialist lawyer into this? Is it just arming themselves with what's available and being prepared?
Yeah, so I think, obviously I don't know the laws of the foreign countries, but hopefully we're sparking some ideas with you, and you can speak to an attorney in your in the city in your country to say, hey, I was at a panel and an American lawyer was talking about what is called a special needs trust. Is it appropriate? There's different laws. Your child in that country may not lose their government benefits because maybe if it's European countries, they're more less restrictive than America would be in government benefits. But you definitely should speak to an attorney.
Yeah, great, thank you. Cal.
Hello. I guess I mostly associate like Social Security with like elderly people who, they retire and they have a Social Security fund. I'm wondering, can you still work and get Social Security?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So Katie works and Sam, they both work. They both get Social Security. Again, thank you for the ABLE account. I had completely forgot about that. It is important though that as her wages goes up, so she's working, so her wages go up, Social Security comes down. So, and it's on a monthly thing. So I don't know why they waste the paper letting us know, but anyway, so yes. One of the things, like I said, the ladies who work, or the men who work the counters at all of the Social Security offices are so kind. I've never met one who was not very kind to us. They're also very kind. They kind of tell us, listen, keep at it. They were like, no, keep at it. But yes, you can still work and start earlier. So one of the reasons we had such a hard time with Katie getting Social Security, and they pay for all of her medical, by the way, all of her appointments, all her medication. Medicaid pays for more of her needs than Sam's. Sam still has co-pays and things like that he has to pay for, which is fine because he works a lot more hours than she does. But the problem was they were looking at her educational records and her ability to communicate, and they kept denying us because they said she's great, she's smart, she's somewhat able to take care of herself. And we're like, hold time out, So we had a big longer fight with her because she was so much older. And they were looking at the fact that she graduated from high school with a diploma, not a certificate. So yes, but yes, you can get Social Security and work.
And for like a guardianship, I guess, how do you know if a person they're I guess, how do I word
Which route
this?
to take?
Yeah,
like
which
whether
route
to
to
do
take,
guardianship
like
or
whether to
not?
do it or
It
not.
really depends on the person that you are and your family. So there is, and I'm not going to name who they are, but there is a family who the person is able to communicate, express their needs. So the parent has power of attorney, but there's not a guardianship. They're not using a guardianship. And but the parent has access to their accounts, financial accounts, and those kinds of things. And so they took that route because the person is able to decide what their needs and wants are. So not a guardianship. In our case with Sam and Katie, if she ever decides or Sam ever decides again that, you know what, I think I'd like to have more control of my medical records and my appointments and so forth, then we would then break the guardianship and maybe go that route. But I think that's how you decide is what protection, what does that person feel comfortable with? And what capabilities does that person have to maintain their own life?
Michaela, there's Jessica.
Jessica.
Hi, we're actually a family that has been denied by SSI, but that was like, we were what, like 2 years old or less than, and we were told we're new, so we're near you. We were told New Jersey is notoriously difficult for that, and that it was unlikely that we would get approved ever, and to just give up, and we did. Doesn't
Go
mean we're
back.
not going to go back. Yeah,
Go back.
Yeah. So,
Go back.
do
and
you
keep going back.
recommend doing the special needs trust after?
No, do not wait. Because if you have any, like I said, life insurance or anything that the special needs trust is completely different. For me, again, we had my retirement that was already protected by the special needs trust. So Sam got approved really quickly. We were surprised. I mean, they still denied him and we had to go, you can appeal it and it takes time. With Katie, we actually got a lawyer, like I said, shockingly in South Dakota. And she is, she does this for a living. And she met Katie and she said, come see me. And if I know I'm not going to win, I won't take your case. But again, within 5 seconds of meeting Katie, she goes, I don't understand why they denied you. And it took another year. And they had more doctors come and see her, and they had more psychiatrists. She had another psych evaluation. But then we went back, and like I said, not even 5 minutes. The judge said, I don't understand why we're here. And usually it takes 60 days to approve Social Security. He approved it that day. Yeah.
They told us it was income based. R was enough to say no.
No, I have all that. I have cars. I
I-
have, I have plenty, but
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
No, because the medical bills my TRICARE would not have covered all of her medical that she needs and that she will eventually potentially need. So that's why we also went that route. Plus it's a right, in the US.
I have about 9 million questions and comments. First of all, so my daughter has Medicaid. She has on Tefra, which I think I'm a huge advocate about. And it's very similar to Social Security in that the system is defaulted to deny you. So you just keep reapplying. And if anyone has any questions about that, let me know. But my question is, well, right now I was thinking, should I be also getting my child on SSI? Like, I don't know that she's qualified for disability yet. At what point do you transition or add that layer onto your care situation. Does that make sense?
So I'm not an expert on it. So but she gets Medicaid.
So if they were applying for Clark who's 6 or 8,
Uh-huh.
well, I didn't think that was something you would transition to until the child was of majority.
Oh, no. You can get SSI. You can get SSI before they turn 18. Yeah, you can get SSI. But again, if you go to Social Security, they'll let you know what they are, what they can apply for.
Okay.
Ask them. And again, because I'm not an expert on Social Security
They're going to take,
benefits,
they're
but-
going to take in the family income and resources. So
Okay.
depending on what your income and resources are, they may get denied, not because of a disability, because of the family's resources and income. But when they turn 18, they do not take the family's resources and income into consideration. So somebody could have parents who are multimillionaires, so their child, when they turn 18, will receive, if they're disabled, SSI.
Okay. So then I probably wouldn't pursue it yet. Okay. All right.
In here.
I'll let someone else ask a question while I consult my list.
Other questions? Okay, we've
So
got,
that she has a list.
I'll pass this one.
Okay, I have two. One is his father and I are divorced. Are we able to both have separate special needs trusts for little guy?
Yes, you both can have separate
Okay.
supplemental needs trusts for him.
And I live in the state of Georgia, so it may be totally different. We're very backwards there. Child support. As of right now, he's obviously a minor, so I'm assuming any of the child support that comes in would go directly to me. But when he turns 18, is that something that I need to worry about with having a, able account or the trust or whatever? So the money, I assume, goes to him once he's 18.
Well, is the support order going to stay in effect once he turns 18?
It is in the state of Georgia, actually. They did something right. I think he's going to have to pay through the age of 20 or 21 now.
Yeah, so SSI will have may deem a portion of that as income, so it could reduce the amount of money of his SSI. I'm not sure of the answer and how Georgia state law applies, but it shouldn't per se cause him to be denied SSI, but it could reduce the amount he gets based on the amount of support. But I don't know what Georgia would say about that.
Thank you for being here. I guess my first question is kind of a clarifying terminology question, the difference between or the term a supplemental needs trust and which one is third party, which one is first, and the difference between a special needs trust.
Okay, so they're both special needs trusts, but the third party, typically the lawyers call it a supplemental needs trust.
Okay.
And the beneficiary is the first party. They're the ones that are going to receive the benefit of the money in the trust. The third party is the person that funds the trust. So that's called a third party supplemental needs trust, which is a special needs trust. It's just terminology.
Okay.
First party, we typically just use the term special needs trust, and first party is funds from the beneficiary that are used to fund the trust.
Okay. Now that's very helpful. So then the first party special needs trust, that's more like defense. If something gets put into an asset and your child with special needs, you would use that to transfer the assets. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so first party would be funds of the beneficiary. So if they received an inheritance outright, and if grandmom left them $100,000, you could then, I guess, the word be in a defensive posture and say, okay, let me assist my child set up a first party special needs trust to protect their benefits.
Okay.
Then the third party is if grandmom left the money outright to the supplemental needs trust, then you don't need to do anything about it because it was properly funded from a third party.
Okay, no, that's really helpful in understanding where we want to help with, with grandparents and things
Yeah,
that
so-
have their best intentions
So
in mind.
some people have both a first party and a third party trust. And you want to make sure that if anybody is going to give money to the disabled person, they give it to the third party trust because there's no payback provision to the government in that trust as opposed to the first party trust where there's a payback provision.
Right.
So you'll let whoever wants to give an inheritance to them to know, what trust to leave it to.
And that's a great segue to my next question, if that's okay. You mentioned the give back or the take back from the government on that special needs trust. Is there also that on an ABLE account? I heard some states have that same.
Yes and no. So upon the death of the person who is the owner of that ABLE account, the authorized person on the account could use funds to pay for the funeral and burial. Whatever's left over, they don't have to contact the government agency to ask for their claim and then send it to them. It will get paid to that person's estate. And then the government would have a claim against those funds in the estate. So yeah, that's why I say yes and no. It doesn't automatically go to the state. It reverts to the deceased disabled person's estate. And then that executor of the estate writes to the government agency to ask for their claim. Now in Pennsylvania, they can only claim benefits they pay for the person when they're 55 and older for the long-term care. So it could be no claim because there was a minimal amount of money that they had to pay for that person.
Last question. On an ABLE account, I read something about $100,000 threshold.
Yes. So SSI will disregard all the assets in that ABLE account. That means they'll exempt it up to $100,000. So once you cross that threshold, SSI will suspend the SSI payments but you'll have the opportunity to spend that money down. So if you're at 101,000, you can buy something for $2,000 to meet that disabled person's needs, and then you've gotten under the $100,000, and then you get your benefits back. One more thing. So in Pennsylvania, they have a wonderful website on PABLE accounts. Even if you're in another state, check it out because a lot of the states are similar and they answer a lot of questions pretty well.
Are these figures marked to inflation or anything? Like this $2,000 limit's been $2,000 for a while and it's more and more ridiculous.
It is.
Like people have teddy bears.
Yeah, I was speaking to a Social Security attorney that helps people apply for SSI or SSDI. And he was telling me that he's speaking to people in the administration that they're recognizing that $2,000 isn't enough. But, there's a lot of inertia in Congress. So fortunately, that ABLE account at least allows them to have an additional 18,000 each year. So that is helpful. So SSDI is disability payments based on your work history. And the good thing about that is there is no resource limit. So you can be a millionaire and get SSDI based on your work history. SSI is for people who are aged, disabled, or blind who don't have this work history. So that's for people that are in the poverty level. But with that, there is that $2,000 limit. Well, there's an exemption to the $2,000. So, a house is exempted, a car is exempted, some personal possessions are exempted. and money in an able account is exempted. So yes, it's not really skirting the rules. They allow you to do that.
Okay. Any more questions? That's fine. I should have stayed up there, shouldn't I?
Thank you. You prompted another question. So let's say child turns 18 and starts working and wants to create a Roth IRA. Could we set that up under the umbrella of a special needs trust to protect?
No, the special needs trust isn't going to, there's rules with the IRAs and ownership of a trust owning the IRA, so it could pose some tax issues.
Okay. So if you were setting up a Roth, let's say if they were working, that would count against the 2,000.
Yes.
Okay.
I also want to remind families who have children who are getting Social Security is to remember that we had a problem is that Katie and Sam's accounts were getting very close to that 2,000. So we went back to Social Security and we're like, listen, I mean, there's only so many Pokemon cards that this kid can buy or, video games that they can play. And she's like, well, are they paying rent? Are you charging them for food? Like, well, no, there are children. She's like, they're adults. They work. They live in your house. Charge them rent. So that's what we do. And we make sure it's all, it's recorded so that they know, they both pay the same amount and we do charge them for food and electricity and water. So it keeps that amount, but we are taking care of them and they live in the house. And so
Right. So
Great advice.
SSI expects parents to do that. Like they told her to do that. The natural instinct is, no, I'm not going to charge them rent, but you need to because you need to keep them under the 2,000. But an additional thing you can do to make you feel better that you're not charging them rent is then take that rent and put it into that third-party special needs trust. You can add to that trust so they can funnel that rent money into the trust. So as long as it gets paid to Inez and her husband, and it goes into their account, and then from their account to the trust, it's fine. You don't want to do it directly to the trust.
Yeah. Do we know if the Myhre diagnosis is enough for disability or do we need like another sub-diagnoses?
It all depends if they can't have substantial ability to work. So if they have the ability to be gainfully employed substantially, then they may not be eligible for disability. But if it affects them to have substantial gainful employment, then that would go to prove that they are disabled and they can't work 40 hours and like a typical person.
And that's the key, the 40 hours. Katie works 2 days a week. Sam works 5 days a week. In our particular case, thank goodness we had the Social Security lawyer because she said we need more. We need more than, because they're denying her because she's smart, because she's somewhat able, still physically able to move. But she can't do 40 hours a week. It's not going to happen. So we went beyond that. We went to our medical doctors and her psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist report actually really helped as well. It wasn't just the Myhre.
I actually have a comment. Am I on? Okay. When I lived in New York, I did assessments of people that were heading into 18 and had a diagnosis of autism or a related developmental disability. And my experience was there wasn't just a flat diagnosis that said that equated to you qualify. And this is going back several years, but at that time it was very difficult, almost impossible to get higher functioning kids on the spectrum qualified. And so the key in terms of one of the keys that you can kind of just put in your toolbox is looking at adaptive skills, and that's skills of daily living. So if your youngster has higher cognitive skills, because sometimes if it's higher than 70, 71, you don't qualify, and it's just a flat no. But we all know that our profiles are so varied. And so if you get an evaluation, look at those skills of daily living or adaptive skills. So you may have a child with higher cognitive skills, but they can't drive, they can't, they don't have the decision making or the lack of impulse or in order to sort of meet their daily needs. And that oftentimes becomes really key. And someone who can write a report that really highlights that.
On the educational side, not to steal your thunder, when Chrissy was talking about building your team for your child, we moved so many times. I've had so many different teams for Sam and Katie. It doesn't have to be the special education teacher or the special education director that you have to have on your side. Just find one person in that school, whether it's a teacher, a speech therapist, whoever, just if everyone can't gel, just find that one champion for your child that's with you. You're the number one champion, but find another champion, but just know that sometimes it's not the special needs people. It might be another teacher. It might be, just find one person that's inside the school, inside the system, that's going to work with you, that's going to communicate with you, and that's going to fight for you, with you.
As ever, I know we could talk all day, but we don't have all day. So we're going to wrap it up there. Could everybody thank our amazing panelists for their time and expertise? We can probably persuade Bradley to stay for a coffee because we do have a break now for 20 minutes. So, and Inez and Chris are here all day. So we can continue those conversations outside as you have a break. We'll be back in here at 10:15 with Dr. Stella Hartono, who has joined us from the NIH to give us a presentation on the immune system. So we'll see you at 10:15. Right, we're going to get started with our next session. So a key discussion point in the Myhre community is the frequency of infections. And this is something the National Institutes of Health, NIH, has been studying for Myhre syndrome. And we're delighted today to be joined by Dr. Stella Hartono, a former clinical fellow at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the NIH. And Stella has flown in from Japan to be with us specially. So we're absolutely thrilled to have her. So everybody welcome Stella.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. I hope everyone can hear me. All right. How about now? No? Yeah. Okay. 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 So I'm going to talk to you about the immune system in Myhre syndrome. And before we start, I'm just gonna kind of give a brief introduction about the immune system, because I know I think I spoke to a great many of you that come visit me at the NIH, but for those of you who had not had a chance to speak to me yet, that the immune system actually involves many organs. So for instance, the bone marrow and the thymus. So this is the organs where your immune system got manufactured and get educated. The spleen and the lymph nodes where they actually get to meet their microbes, the antigens that got presented to them. And then the anodoids and the tonsils, and as far as the skin and the mucosal surfaces, they're also part of your immune system. And as you can imagine, with Myhre syndrome, a lot of these things also get affected. So not just your blood cells, like what a lot of people think. But as far as your white blood cell itself, there's also a great many different types of, white blood cells. So the way we look at it as an immunologist, there's two different types. So granulocytes and agranulocytes. It's kind of a fancy way of saying cells that have granules and cells that don't have granules. So the one that have granules, are like neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. And I put in there kind of like, what their functions are. So like your neutrophils, or this is just kind of like, your regular like, white blood cells that like engulf bacteria. They make pus. So like, kind of like, if you have like, infections, this is like, like one of those cells that's kind of like, like make pus, like kill a lot of like, like the bacteria on the surfaces. Eosinophils are like the one that's like, attack parasites. And basophils are like, the immune system that got involved in the allergies. Versus like, like the cells that don't have granules. So this is like the lymphocytes and the monocytes. Or these are like the specific cells that fights like bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And specifically, we're gonna talk later about B cells. So this is like, like a specialized cells that manufactured antibodies. So again, like, like you've seen the slides probably. This is like, again, like, the many different clinical manifestations of the Myhre syndromes. And I highlighted some of these things that can affect the immune system. So hypertension, if you can imagine, it's like, like your white blood cells live in, circulations, right? So like, like having hypertension then kind of like affects their functions and like, like the things that they do. Sorry about that. And, also like, like a lot of like the anatomical things that like involved in Myhre. So like, again, laryngotracheal narrowing. So like, like narrow like ear tubes, narrow airways. So things like that can also affect like the functions of your immune systems. Now, if you talk about kind of the actual genetic defects in Myhre syndrome, the SMAD4 mutations then affects like the signaling in the TGF-beta pathways. Then TGF-beta itself have been known to function in a lot of many different aspects of immune activations. So this is just like, kind of like a very brief snapshot of what TGF-beta does in the innate immune activations. And by innate, that means like, this is just a non-specific immune activations. And there's also effects of TGF-beta in the adaptive immune activations. And when we say adaptive immune activation, that means like, specific immune activations that's going to affect response to a very specific, I guess like, like diseases or bacteria or viruses. So we've been doing this study for like about like 3 to 4 years now. And now I can report to you that like, I've been seeing like, at least about like 20 patients. Not all of them are seen at the NIH, but like a great many of them. Our patients like, age range between like 4 to 51 years with the median of 10 years. So like, majority of the patients that I've seen are kind of like in the pediatric age range. And so far, it's like, like we have about 10 males and 10 females, so about equal in age distributions. And in the pie chart here, I've shown you kind of like, the different type of genetic transitions that like, we've seen. So again, as Dr. Lin probably already mentioned, like, majority of them is going to be the isoleucine 500V. So this is like the most common, followed by the R496C. And like, we also seen like, like a couple of others that are not so common. And when we look into what these patients are actually experiencing, as you can see, like about 75% of them actually reported a frequency of ear infections. A lot of this, like, happens in childhood. About like half of them would say that like, it got improved as they grow older. But some of these patients continue to have like, a frequency of like ear infections that like we don't really see in adults. About 30% like, like reported sinus infections, frequencies of like, like upper respiratory infections, or just kind of like, a lot of common colds. About 15% of the patients have like a pneumonia that requires hospitalizations. Again, 15% have like, this instances of like, pericarditis. And only like about 5% of the patients actually reported like warts or EBV. So again, kind of like a very specific type of like, viral infections that like not normally seen. We do notice like some reports of like ground glass opacity. So again, a lot of upper respiratory infections sometimes can cause you to have long-term lung issues. And some of these patients reported to me that they got prescribed antibiotics as a prophylaxis. Again, and this has been reported to be very helpful. I did prescribe this also to some of the patients when I deem it necessary. But so far kind of what I'm found interesting is that none of the patients that I seen have reported any allergies or autoimmunity, which sometimes we see with other types of immune deficiencies. So this one it's very specific to be kind of just again upper respiratory infection for the patients, which then kind of bring out the whole point, right? Is it really just the immune system, or is it a lot of the anatomical problems that cause these issues? And if it is the immune system, is it the B cell, the T cells, or again, whether or not it's actually anatomical issues? Now, again, out of the 20 patients that I've seen, and we're gonna compare this with again, age match, gender match controls. A lot of the patients that we see seems to have a low immunoglobulin. And when I say low immunoglobulin, not the IgM. So when we're talking about immunoglobulin, there's three, I guess there's actually 4 different types. There's IgM, which is get manufactured by B cells upon initial encounter with your microbes or viruses. And then there's IgG and IgA, which is a more specialized antibody. And this is the one that we actually want when you have an infection. The one that I don't report over here is an IgE, which is again another specialized antibody that get manufactured when you have allergies. And as I mentioned before, since none of the patients have allergies, and I don't really see any difference with the healthy volunteers, and I didn't report it over here. But again, if you notice in the graph that I've shown here, a lot of the patients seems to have again lower IgG and IgA compared to healthy volunteers. The other way we can evaluate an immune system is to look into a vaccine titer. So again, all of us get immunized, all of us manufactured antibodies. And there's kind of an expected threshold that you see after an immunization. And what we see here is a lot of the patients don't seem to have kind of the vaccine titer that we're expecting to see after an immunizations. So this is again, looking into the 3 different common vaccine. So tetanus, rubella, and S pneumonia. Now, the interesting thing is some of the patients, then I would advise all right, get yourself re-immunized. And then we're gonna measure your titers again. And when we measure the titers again, 4 to 6 weeks after, they seems to have normal initial response, completely normal, what I'm expecting out of a healthy volunteer. But when you compare it, kind of the length of immunization. So if you're looking at this graph, the x-axis, the bottom one shows you kind of the time since the last vaccinations in years, while the y-axis, so the height of the dot itself shows you the response, right? And if you see the blue dots, so this is kind of again normal healthy volunteers. Even after 12 years, you see the response for tetanus seems to hover around 2 international units per milliliter. While with patients with Myhre, you see the response seems to decay a lot faster. And when we follow each individual patients over time, this is what we see, right? So this is 2 different examples. So patient C is an 11-year-old patients that I've seen who come in with again, pretty much no titers to tetanus, despite the mother told me it's oh no, he's completely immunized. So we give him a booster, follow him over time. And as you can see here, like, like within 3 years, he loses his titers. Looking into patient B, kind of similar things. Like, like she swears to me up and down. It's like, like, no, I get like, vaccinated with varicella multiple times. But, again, like, like no titer. So like, we give a booster, normal initial response, and then like, not even a year, she lost her, her vaccine titers. So I decided to take a look into kind of like, all right, like, like, is there like any differences in any of like, those white blood cells types that I mentioned to you before? So like, again, as we can see, despite the frequency of infection, we actually see like that Myhre patients seems to have a lot more neutrophils compared to like normal people, and also a lot more lymphocytes and monocytes. Again, like no difference in eosinophils and basophils, which again, what I'm expecting, right? Like, I don't really see any increased frequency in like, parasitic infections or allergy. And if you look into like a very specific type of like, again, lymphocytes, again, we see like an increase in CD4 T cells, an increase in CD8 positive T cells, an increase in B cells, and like, maybe like in a slightly decreased NK cells, which kind of like makes no sense if you think about it, right? Like, we have no antibodies, but like we have a lot of cells. So what's going on? So then like, we look into like very specifically into the B cells. Why is this happening? And what I found is that a lot of like the B cells that, that the patient have is naive B cells. So this is like, again, like the B cells that get manufactured, like they have not encountered antigens yet. So like, get not educated. And the B cells that we want, like, the one that's actually like, going to manufacture, like, all these antibodies are not there. So something happened in between these two. And similar story was found, with the CD4 T cells. So again, increased number of CD4 T cells, but most of those are naive CD4 T cells, right? Not the memory CD4 T cells that we wanted. So in summary so far, like, like again, like, we have like, patients who have like, what we call hypogammaglobulinemia. So like, again, like, a decrease in immunoglobulin, decrease in the B cell memory, and an impaired vaccine response. And as I mentioned to you before, like, we're going to talk more about like these B cells. So the role of B cells in antibody productions, right? It's like, like we talk about like, right, we have naive B cells. So what is this naive B cell supposed to do? They're supposed to go into the germinal center. So when germinal centers, so like, I'm talking about like, your tonsils, your adenoids, your lymph nodes, so that's why when you get sick, those organs got big because, that's where your B cell goes and they manufacture, they kind of like multiply themselves and to be able to fight the infections. And some of these B cells will then manufactured, like, turn into like a short-lived plasma cells that manufactured the IgM. And based on what we see, this is kind of what I suspected happening, that like, we are, that the B cells in Myhre syndromes are capable of manufacturing this IgM, which is like why we don't see a decrease when we see, the comparison between Myhre patients and the healthy volunteers. But we see a decrease in the IgG and the IgA, as you see here, because like there's something happens in the germinal center. Now, of course, studying germinal centers in humans are a little challenging, you can imagine. I can ask patients, to donate blood, obviously, but like, when we start talking about kind of like, well, tonsils and everything else, that's get a little bit difficult. So this is like, when we actually switch into, studying mouse model. And we're very lucky that Dr. Mark Lindsay, which like many of you know, actually have like this mouse model of Myhre syndrome. And the way he make this mouse is actually kind of cool. Again, you guys will have to like really, I guess, like, understandable if you want to. So we use like this Cree-lock system where, like, we inserted the gene. Oops. We inserted the gene that contain like the Myhre mutations into the mouse. But the way we insert it is that, like, we have this switch, this LOXP, that allows you to insert it only in the cells that you wanted. So we can actually make a mouse that has the Myhre system, the Myhre mutations in all the cells by using, like this Cree, CMV Cree. So like, again, the CMV got expressed in every single cells. So then it's gonna express in every single cells of this mouse body. And he actually told me that, like, when he made this mouse, that this mouse seems to have like spontaneous rhinitis and nasal inflammation. So again, kind of like very similar to, like, what we see in people. I still don't know how, like, you actually can like tell if a mouse have rhinitis. But, he told me that. So I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But, we decided at the NIH, was like, all right, so then, we're going to make like, like this mouse that have, by crossing, again, like, the mutation into like a VAV3. So this way we created, sorry, the mutation only in the hematopoietic cells, right? So only your white blood cells will have this mutation. So that way then we can see if like the anatomical issues is actually contributing to this problem. And then we immunize the mouse and then like wait, 2 months to see like, if we're gonna see the same thing that we see with the patients. And when we do that, we did see that. So like, after again, like, like after day 14 and after like, 2 months, like, again, like, initial like immunization and then after second booster, we saw that the mouse is losing immunoglobulin G. Again, like, this is the immunoglobulin that we are expecting to see after immunizations. And with the mouse, it's actually kind of cool because then we can actually then measure very, very specific like immunoglobulin. So like, the one that we call like, the high affinity. So the one that's like really bind to the virus or the bacteria that we are targeting. With like with human is a little difficult just because like humans have like very different genes. So, and we also kind of like, see the same thing, like, like they're losing their memory B cells, they're losing their plasma cells. So again, kind of like very reminiscent to like, what we see in our patients. And since like, we're interested in B cells, then we're like, fine, we're gonna like actually make a B cell specific Myhre syndrome where, again, this defect is only restricted to the B cells and not the other like white blood cells. And we do pretty much kind of like the same thing again, where we're immunizing the mouse, again, like with initial response and with the secondary response. And this way we actually can like really target the response. So like, the NP2 is like the high affinity antibody that I was talking about. And as you can see, this is the one that like you see is being lost over time versus the NP36. So this is kind of like a non-specific antibody, which we see no difference. And when we look into like, again, plasma cells, so like, again, this is just like a graph. This is actually like a in vitro experiment that I did using patient cells. So what we did is we isolated B cells from patient or from a healthy volunteer. We stimulate them with, again, like, like a very specific antigen or reagent that like the B cells already know. And every single line that you see there is a division of the cells itself. And after like 6 or 7 divisions, what we see, what we're expecting to see, as you can see in the healthy volunteer box that I circled over there, it's like, like a population of plasma cells being developed. Because plasma cell is like, your antibody factory. And with the Myhre, if you notice, right, like, they undergo the division, but they don't make the cells. So I think right now, like, we can conclude that there's two different things that we can talk about, right? On the clinical side, like, I think like a lot of like the patients ask me, since we are not making antibodies, should we then like, like think about using immunoglobulin replacement therapy or using antibiotic prophylaxis if you have this recurrent infection as an issue? On the basic science side, as I mentioned, like, like we already like, I think pretty much can narrow down that the problem is occurring in the germinal center. What we're trying to do right now is like, like being able to visualize the germinal center in the mouse, and correlating this, like again, with tonsil tissues or lymph node that we got from the patient. So if any of you guys know anybody that's like just get their tonsils taken out, like contact me ahead of time. Like, I would be love to have like, like a sample of tissues from patients. And again, like, like we can't do this research, like, without your help. I really, really appreciate like a lot of the family that try, take their time and trouble to travel to the NIH. I know it's not an easy ask. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Stella. Questions about the immune system? Here we go.
You mentioned about an accelerated decline in the vaccines.
Mhm.
Would that also explain maybe some accelerated decline in other prescription efficacies?
Which prescription efficacy specifically do you?
Basically, like anytime we've started him on a medication, like let's say a mood regulator, for example, it works amazing for about a month, maybe two. And then it decreases. And then we're getting off of it because it's doing absolutely nothing.
I think, I can't speak specifically with, like without knowing, like, what the medication is, but like, I suspect like, I think that more probably more related to, I guess, the metabolism of the drug itself. Yeah.
Well, that was what I was kind of wondering, whether that increased metabolism, similar to the vaccine, you saw it, you respond better, I think, with the booster. Did it, would it have the same kind of reaction, I guess? The other question that I was going to ask was with respect to the vaccines, do we need to get it more often?
Yeah, so that's kind of like, that's actually would be like, the recommendations that I give, like, with patients, like, like if you have kids that have like, again, a lot of recurrent infections, ask your pediatrician to like, check the vaccine titers. And if the vaccine titers are non-existent, like, then, yeah, definitely get a boosters. Some of the patients, like, told me that like, after they got a boosters, especially with the S-pneumo vaccine, like the kids responded like beautifully. So.
I can only talk anecdotally from the group, but and Kathy might be able to nod along with me. But I know members of the community have had that metabolic testing done, so that it can then determine how fast things are happening in the body, how fast they're processing, and have therefore then had prescriptions adjusted. Now that's as we know, no doctor. So that's just an anecdotal piece of feedback from the community. I know that some of them have had that test done just to see how the body metabolizes. Oh yeah, I think so. Yep. And then they can refer you to a specialist if needed. Other questions on immune system?
This is more of a statistics nerd kind of question.
No.
Did you have enough of a control sample for unaffected siblings versus Myhre patients to compare and find any correlations between any of that, or is it specifically just because of Myhre?
No, we actually collected samples from like, unaffected relatives. And, we are actually very lucky. I get like, 2 pairs of twins that, like, included in the studies. And like, for those like, vaccine responses. So this is again, like, siblings that got like vaccinated at the same time. They got exposed to the same pretty much like, household germs, right? Yeah. Their response are like this. So
Hello. So if one wanted to get like metabolic testing or the test,
mhm,
like how good your immune system is, I guess.
mhm.
Like how would one do that? Like, could I get that? Like I message my doctor on like a portal and get a referral and get that in my area, or
Yeah, so like, talk to like, your primary care. So like, again, if you're kids, like, pediatricians, if not like, your internal medicine doctor can also like, do the same thing. They can either refer you to an immunologist, or if they want to do like their regular basic testing, I think you can start with, just again, doing an immunoglobulin response and vaccine titers. Those are kind of like, pretty much what be the initial go-to that I would do.
I've got a question on that because I'm also a parent as well, so parent hat now. So if we are seeing low IgG and IgA, if there aren't recurrent infections though, do we just kind of let it be, keep monitoring? Is it really the infections that are indicating, if we need to step in?
Yes. So I would only, like this is what I always tell my patients, right? I don't treat numbers. I treat the patient, right? If the patient doesn't have any problems, yes, even if the number was low, I would just kind of keep monitoring. I would monitor them probably like more often than my, completely normal healthy patients. So like, completely normal healthy patient, I'd be like, yeah, come back like every 2 to 3 years. Somebody with like, low immunoglobulin, I'll be like, you know what, come back every 6 months, because again, they might be fine now, they might not be fine in 6 months, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's good advice.
Thank you. Do the Myhre patients respond to infections the same way as the normal population as far as inflammation and fever and things like that?
So interesting that you asked that, because like when COVID happened, we were actually very worried about this. And what I hear is interesting because apparently Myhre patients don't really have, experience COVID as terrible. Yeah. Compared to, I mean, if somebody else is like, like actually like experience something different, please tell me. But like, so far the patients that I have told me, it's like, oh yeah, the sibling was like, kind of like having a miserable time and they were like fine. And I suspect it is actually because like they don't really mount like the same inflammatory response like normal patients. The problem with COVID is that,
Response, yeah.
exactly, it's an aberrant response, right? Like, like they kind of like triggers your immune system to kind of like go gangbusters. With like Myhre patients, like, like they don't experience that. So they're like, yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a nonverbal child and we can never tell what's going
Mhm.
on with him. Oh, and I'm trying to be more sensitive to clues, but
Yes.
I'm not getting them. Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
What I do hear is that like, sometimes when they got cold, they don't, like it takes them longer to recover compared to their siblings.
Yeah, I think we can all, I'm nodding from experience with that. I can see some nodding going
Yeah.
on here as well.
Yes.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, that you go. I'm gonna run Michaela up those stairs. She's younger than me.
Hello, yeah, thank you. It's kind of to follow up with what the gentleman here and Kate were speaking about. I think you touched on it again, but I just want to kind of reconfirm.
Mhm.
So, because Andy's going through exactly what you're saying, is that we're with immunology right now, and she got vaccinated. Response was low, blood tests were done, revaccinated, and so on. So I guess to just ask the question one more time,
Mhm.
if she gets boosted and the levels, I guess what you were saying is that they kind of maintain a little bit, but then they drop off again, correct?
Yes.
At what point, kind of again, what Kate was saying, at what point should we follow up with that? How often should we reboosting? I guess kind of along the terms of what our responsibility is as parents. How often should we go back to immunology and say, it's recommended that we see you once a year, every 6 months, so on? I guess.
I would recommend at least like once a year.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So
If
even if
not,
even if the values are low, but there is no real infection happening, no active response, then that's good enough. Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Like, again, like, without, with any absence of like, again, like, having recurrent infections or like, having actual illness, I think once a year monitoring would be fine. But, again, if your kids is having like a lot of issues, then I would like, come back sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that kind of concerned us was the measles outbreaks that were happening recently. I don't know if you had it in the United States, but in Canada, we've had a few in Quebec.
Yes.
And that's something that I don't know, we're hesitant to get it to that point where we would see the response before bringing her in, like it's something that most people don't have to worry about because they're vaccinated for it. But if the response is low,
Yes.
I don't want my child to start getting symptomatic with measles before bringing her in.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, again, I think like, I would definitely, your pediatrician probably can like, do, I don't know. So you're from Canada? Yeah. Okay. Maybe a little different. The pediatrician over here can like, order vaccine titer. So, like you don't have to go back to immunology unless like, those vaccine titers becomes low. But, I don't know if, in Canada, because I know like sometimes like those some testing that like, we take for granted over here, like over there, it's a little different. So I would say like, talk to your pediatrician and see like, if they can do the vaccine titer monitoring for you. And if not, then like, talk to your immunologist. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if you want, I mean, like, again, I can give you like, my contact information, you can give it to your immunologist and we can chat about it. Yeah. Because I mean, again, like, we're still like learning about these things as well. So like, I can give you kind of like, oh, every 6 months. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I guess the big outtake is ensure that we are making PCPs, and if we haven't seen an immunologist yet, making them aware that Myhre children will lose the effectiveness of vaccinations much quicker.
Yes.
And it's something we need to monitor. And that from an immunology point of view, the IgG and IgA can be low, and we might not know because it might not be presenting as infection, but we still need to monitor it. Because am I right in thinking if it gets too low, even if there's no infection, it might be something we'd want to address?
Yes.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Stella. Thank you for being here.
thank
It's
you.
absolutely amazing. We're going to get started with our final session in here. We are joined by Joy Bress and Cara Masse, who are board certified pediatric clinical specialists from the Myhre Syndrome Clinic and are senior physical therapists. They provide care for numerous clinics, MGH, including the Myhre Syndrome Clinic, and they are contributors also to the recently published article that Angela had printed for us all. I've personally been to see them twice now. It's absolutely wonderful. It's one of Josh's favorite sessions going to see PT because they make it so fun. So please welcome them.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We are so happy to have the chance to talk to you today. But we thought since it's physical therapy that we might get you guys to stand back up for a minute. I know you just sat down, but if you have the effort and want to stand up and just do a little bit of a stretch, reach up high, reach over to the side a little bit. All right. And then have a seat and we'll get started. We've really enjoyed having the opportunity to chat with so many of you throughout our drop-in session so far, and we're excited to dive more into general physical therapy concepts for Myhre syndrome. We do not have anything to disclose for this presentation. As Kate mentioned, we are physical therapists that work as a part of the comprehensive medical team in the Myhre Syndrome Clinic with Dr. Lin at Massachusetts General Hospital. As a part of the clinic, we complete 90-minute physical therapy evaluations with the patient and their families. And as pediatric clinicians, we work mostly with children under 18, and we do have a few colleagues that we work with who see older adolescents and adults in the clinic. So, what are we going to talk about today? We want you to be able to recognize common musculoskeletal symptoms and when they can become a concern. Describe how and when physical therapy can help, Identify information to share with your local physical therapist and highlight some fun activities and guidelines around physical activity. All right, let's start with a few questions. Show of hands, who has seen a physical therapist before? All right, sounds good. And who here has felt like their provider did not understand the unique needs of treating you or your child? Yeah, some. This is exactly what we want to talk to you about today and discuss ways we can make your experience better the next time you go to see a physical therapist. So, what does a physical therapist do? The American Physical Therapy Association defines physical therapists as licensed doctors who work with multiple patient populations that are impacted by disease, injury, and movement dysfunction. So they try to optimize quality of life by maintaining, restoring, improving patients' ability to move, function, and live more active lifestyles. The goal of physical therapy in Myhre syndrome is to promote mobility and function so that you or your child can participate in life tasks and roles, such as being a student, working a job, walking up and down the stairs, and participating in community activities. In Myhre syndrome, we know that there are factors that can impact mobility and participation. These are things such as orthopedic complications such as stiff joints, contractures, and pain that can limit mobility and participation. We also know that cardiorespiratory health can be affected in those with Myhre syndrome, which can also impact exercise tolerance and walking capacity. Physical therapy can help to reduce these orthopedic complications and improve cardiorespiratory health. When we see a patient in the clinic for a physical therapy evaluation, our goal is to establish a baseline to be able to monitor changes and progressions in mobility and function over time. These assessments are tailored to the individual based on their age and ability to participate. There are certain objective data measurements that we want to assess, whether it is with us in the clinic or with your local physical therapist. The things that we're going to talk about this morning that we include in a physical therapy evaluation are also listed in the article Emergence of the Natural History of Myhre Syndrome by Lin et al. So you can go back and reference that to be able to share with physical therapists at home. We look at range of motion, including range of motion of the hips, knees, ankles, shoulders, neck and spine, wrists, elbows, so pretty much everything. And range of motion means how much does our joint move? So we're looking at the flexibility of our joints. We also look at strength, muscle tone, gait, which is our walking pattern, balance, posture, coordination, chest wall excursion, which is how much does our chest move when we take a breath, and gross motor development. In our evaluations, we use a goniometer, pictured here, to gain objective data of the degree of contractures at joints so that we can establish that baseline to track over time and determine the need for physical therapy intervention. We also want to evaluate any activity limitations and participation restrictions that an individual might have. This may be through a 6-minute walk test for adolescents and adult patients, or just by gathering some patient and parent report.
Great. So let's dive a little bit more into Myhre and what this looks like. So these are a few examples of co-occurring diagnoses that physical therapy should be involved in the care of. So many of these you'll recognize within the individuals in this room. So we are looking at stiff joints and leg pain, scoliosis, neurological diagnoses, which could include Chiari malformations, epilepsy, spinal stenosis, tethered cord syndrome. And we're truly interested in that abnormal gait pattern, specifically toe walking. But that's just one example. So other things to consider for physical therapy include how it's impacting the function and participation, how to promote good muscle length to prevent long-term restrictions that can lead to pain and poor mechanics in the future, and how to minimize those long-term impacts and need for surgical intervention. So patients and family members have asked many of these questions whenever they come into our office. These are definitely the most that we hear. Will I make improvement with regular exercise and stretching program? The answer is yes. How do I or my child compare to others with a diagnosis of Myhre? This really helps us from a diagnostic perspective. And what should I be aware of moving forward? And what does my local physical therapist need to know? So based upon our experience and the limited frequency dictated by the rarity of Myhre syndrome, it does appear that people with Myhre are able to make range of motion gains with typical interventions, such as stretching and joint mobilizations used to address these limitations. We have not yet seen hyperproliferation responses in treating muscles and joint limitations within the physical therapy setting. But like we know, everyone with Myhre is different. But gathering annual information to track musculoskeletal changes like progressive joint stiffness over time is important. If the person with Myhre syndrome presents with any of the following problems, please seek out the advice of a local physician or physical therapist. So an increase in toe walking or increased stiffness of gait, trouble participating in activities that the person was able to do previously, any pain symptoms, loss of function, like running, jumping, climbing at the playground, anything. We really want to take a look and see what could be causing that new loss of function, or if we're noticing more of a crouched or bent position. So very often, especially in Dr. Lynn's evaluations, our role is to help make those recommendations. So yes, we are experts in Myhre, yet we all know that you're going to go home into your local physical therapist and want to have a little bit more background information of how to help make physical therapy successful. So really quickly, we just want to highlight many of you participated in early intervention and now have school services, and when are those appropriate versus when to seek outpatient or clinic-based therapy. So let's talk real quick about highlighting these. So early intervention is a program for children strictly from birth until 3 years of age who have developmental delays or at risk for developmental delay. By providing timely and appropriate interventions, pediatric physical therapists can help develop the skills they need to succeed in life, such as finding gross motor skills, coordination, balance, and posture. School-based physical therapists focus on access and help students physically access their school environment as independently and fully as possible. For example, a school-based PT might help a child work on their sitting balance to be able to safely sit in the chair in the classroom, help with coordination and ball skills to help participate in gym class, or work on walking speed to help a child go from class to class on time and keep up with the other kids. Clinic-based physical therapists like Kara and I, MS General, focus on helping with children with goals related to participation with their activities with their family or out in the community with their peers. So clinic-based PT can be an area or for things like children returning to activities after an injury or learn to improve their walking skills for going on family outings. Referral to a clinic-based physical therapist comes from a medical physician, but depending on what state you live in, you might have access to direct access to the physical therapist. So look locally to see if that's an option for you. The clinic-based setting often focus more on the medical continuum of needs and assess to a wide variety of settings. So this is the place that you want to get your baseline examinations to assess things like muscle length, posture, and functional concerns. Our brains do work a little bit differently in what we're looking for, especially in the Myhre population, compared to early intervention, thinking about early gross motor skills, or school who's strictly looking at accessing their curriculum. So we're looking more at that nitty gritty, those specific numbers, the objective data that we're interested in that then we can be tracking over time. So from there, your PT may then recommend a treatment plan that includes things like stretching and strengthening, balance activities that address any of the identified difficulties that you or your child are having. Okay, so we know the most important recommendation that we can give to all of you is stay active, keep your body moving. The CDC recommends that children get at least 60 minutes of physical activity each day, including aerobic activity, muscle strengthening, and bone strengthening activities. The activity should be age appropriate and fun and can be broken up into short bursts throughout the day. But if your child's new to physical activity, you can start slowly and gradually increase up to that intensity. For adults, the recommendation is at least 150 minutes per week for moderate intensity physical activity, such as fast walking, cycling, hiking, just a few examples. And additionally, for Myhre syndrome, we recommend adding a stretching program to all of the above. Okay, it's not included in the physical activity, but stretching we find is very, very important. So outside of physical therapy, we like to recommend extracurricular or community-based activities, but not are all created equally. We found that some are much more beneficial for this population. So what we're looking for are things that promote breath work and flexibility. So our favorites are swimming, yoga, martial arts, and many communities offer adaptive programs as well and Special Olympics opportunities. Youth athletes from 2 to 8 years old. So they're starting as young as 2 years old in Special Olympics programming. And then 8+, you get all the other fun activities like skiing, swimming, lots of other options. But this allows for opportunity to practice and continue to progress with skills learned in other PT settings. Okay, that's our presentation, everyone. Thanks, guys. So it sounds like we have a little bit of time for some questions. Does anybody have specific questions for physical therapy today?
Hi.
So happy you're here.
Yeah.
Do you like stretching?
I've been to Cobblestone Therapy Group.
Thank
you
for
awesome.
joining us.
I get any other hands up at the moment? I get one thing right. You've seen Josh, and I guess as a parent of a child who should be doing some of these things, and I know we need to. There is some resistance to his involvement and wanting to do them.
Yeah,
as fun as I try and make them.
Yeah.
So, what would your advice be on that? Is it trying to build a routine?
Yes.
And just slowly gains, even if we're only in a position for 2 seconds at first.
Correct. Okay. So this is more from experience in working with young children in general. This comment we get from every parent I have ever worked with. And now as a parent, I'm like, yes, that tummy time. Didn't get that session in this week.
Yeah.
So I think 2 things. One is the fun factor is huge and allowing the children to make those decisions for themselves. So I truly love extracurricular activities because I think it takes the onus off of the parents and you have somebody else dictating sort of that activity level. There's a community that's based around extracurriculars, and that's how you can sort of get those minutes in that movement, but understanding that, okay, we tried swimming, he hated swimming. We went to dance, he loved dance. Okay, beautiful. Josh is saying this is the thing that he's going to be successful at. We can take a step back from swimming right now, even though we know it might be a little bit better than dance, but he's participating in dance. Let's stick with the dance classes. The other thing from a stretching program perspective, making it a habit. I always use toothbrushing as that example, right? The dentists have told us we have to brush your teeth. The physical therapists are saying you have to stretch your body, okay? And having a physical therapist help guide you on where the most important movements are. So for instance, if we're saying, okay, no, his wrists have full range of motion. We don't need to do stretching for his wrists, but he's really lacking that shoulder mobility. Let's come up with one stretch for shoulders, one stretch for hips, and make it part of the routine. And then it doesn't become a battle. This is parenting 101, right? Sleep habits and brushing teeth and all those things. But for the Myhre population, particularly, that stretching program should be in there somewhere. Yeah.
one thing I know, I think it was you guys told me that was a great tip is that evening story time, we now lay on the floor on our tummies and then, you know, whatever position we can stay that they're entertained and he's on his front and it's just getting that lovely stretch and he doesn't even
Exactly.
realize, well, we might have just always been lying on the bed or sitting on the bed. You can build it into the routine.
Yep.
So that's been a good one. I will need to work on the others.
Fair. Good start.
That's
Good
one
start,
win.
good start.
That's one win. And how often should people be checking back in? Like how often is it just depending on the need in terms of the regularity?
Yeah. So in a clinic-based setting, we're hyper focusing on episodic care right now. And so what we're doing with more chronic conditions, what we consider with Myhre, is getting a baseline understanding, finding those places where there might be some benefit for physical therapy, doing a short course of physical therapy, usually 8 to 12 weeks, depending on how the patient's participating, and then saying, okay, now you go find that swim class, go try these exercises at home, and I'll check in with you in 3 months. Why this is so important is because I really want you to come back in 3 months and those numbers that we've been tracking look the same or better. And if they do, then we're saying, awesome, keep doing what you're doing. I'll see you again in 3 months. But if there's an area that looks worse anywhere, we can say, it's time for physical therapy again. These are our goals. This is what we're going to work towards. He's toe walking more. We're going to introduce physical therapy again with that goal of addressing the toe walking.
Okay.
And so I think what we've heard amongst a lot of families is kids have been in physical therapy for years and years and years. And what are we working on? And we know we need to stretch. We know we need to do this. But that's truly not what we found to be helpful for any of these more chronic lifelong conditions.
So breaking up and then reviewing, adapting, moving on. And I guess that keeps it more fun as well, like new programs, introducing new stretches and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the other piece of it too is that with the episodic care, it gives us that trial period to know, is your home program working? Because if we don't kind of say, take it and run with it, we don't know if it's the weekly physical therapy you're doing forever that's kind of holding things up. And so how do we kind of allow patients and families to really build it into the routine and we know that it's successful?
Or I keep going and asking my questions. This is great. You're just witness to like just this one-on-one Q&A here. Deep tissue, like hands up, I like a deep tissue massage. Like, yeah. Does that become at any point part of it or not based on their tightness? Is there any benefit? Has that been talked about? Is there, or what's the view on that?
Yeah, I think it can be a good adjunct to movement. Massages are very passive. And so for physical therapists who are interested in movement, the massage can temporarily possibly relax some of the muscles, but in the long run, we don't know what the frequency would look like. How beneficial is it from a day-to-day perspective? So I always say it's like an adjunct to what you're doing. And it's not, we don't know the answer to this, but in theory, it shouldn't be hurting them at all. And it could be helpful, but I would hope that it would be massage plus physical therapy
Absolutely
to see the benefits in the long run.
Yeah, because it's interesting, isn't it, that we go to baby massage classes and we do all these lovely things and then slowly just stops. Yeah. So I guess if they're enjoying it, if it's part of a routine, if we're moisturizing or doing anything and it's a nice release, it's part of something.
Exactly.
And that can be done. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, just a comment. I've done deep tissue massages with my physical therapist, and I would recommend it. It's great. It's really helped. She does like my legs and upper back, and I'm like, "Is it tight?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay."
Beautiful.
Sorry about that.
But Cal, it's a whole part of your routine, right? It's not the only thing that she's doing.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Like we do our stretches, and then
Great.
heat too really helps. Like when I'm
Nice.
just at home, just like a heating pad
Yeah.
for 15 minutes, just,
Beautiful.
and I have a massager,
Nice. Perfect. Yeah.
That's awesome.
What about cupping?
I can't speak to cupping at all because we don't use it in our practice. Yeah, I just don't know enough about it to make a comment on it, honestly. Yeah.
Any more questions? Nope. Okay, well, you guys have obviously had access to Joy and Cara all weekend, and we're so thankful that you've been here, come from MGH to support us. And let's give them another round of applause. Thank you.